German generals believed American logistics were a joke. Their reports mocked U.S. supply discipline, calling it sloppy, slow, and childish. They predicted that Patton's tanks would grind to a halt within days. But these men, most of them untrained truck drivers, most of them invisible to their own army, would turn those roads into the most dangerous battlefields of the war. And before long, those same German generals would stop laughing, because the thing they mocked was about to unleash the fastest armored advance in modern history. Inside a bunker somewhere in occupied France, German officers gather around intelligence reports. Cigarette smoke curls toward the ceiling. Maps cover the walls. One officer reads aloud, and the room erupts in laughter. The report describes American supply operations as chaotic, undisciplined, impossibly disorganized. Another officer shakes his head, almost pitying. He says the Americans will never sustain an advance beyond the beaches. Their logistics are too primitive, too American. The German High Command has studied warfare for centuries. They've perfected the blitzkrieg. They've calculated fuel consumption rates, ammunition expenditure, mechanical failure probabilities. And according to every calculation, every historical precedent, the Americans simply don't have what it takes. One general places his finger on the map, tracing the route from Normandy into France. He pauses, looks up, and declares with absolute confidence that Patton's Third Army will run out of fuel within 72 hours. The room nods in agreement. This isn't arrogance. This is mathematics. But 200 miles away, a different kind of mathematics is unfolding. The beaches of Normandy, August 1944. Victory is fresh, barely 3 months old. But behind the cheering, behind the photographs of soldiers raising flags, there's chaos. Total, overwhelming chaos. Thousands of tons of supplies pile up on the beaches, mountains of ammunition, fuel drums stacked higher than houses, food, medicine, parts. Everything needed to sustain an army sits there, useless, because there's no way to move it inland. The roads are destroyed, the rail lines are bombed to rubble, the ports are either wrecked or still in German hands. And even if the infrastructure were intact, the U.S. Army doesn't have enough trucks, not nearly enough. Planners expected a slow, grinding campaign. They prepared for trench warfare, for measured advances, for static front lines. Nobody prepared for what Patton wants to do. And Patton wants to run. General George S. Patton Jr. stands in a command tent staring at a map with the intensity of a man possessed. His Third Army has just broken through German lines. The enemy is retreating, disorganized, vulnerable. For the first time since D-Day, there's an opening, a chance to end this war, not in years, but in months, maybe weeks. All he needs is fuel, just fuel. Keep the tanks moving, keep the pressure on, don't let the Germans regroup. But every morning, the same conversation. His logistics officers tell him the fuel isn't coming fast enough. The supply lines are stretched thin. The trucks can't keep up. Patton's face turns red. He slams his fist on the table. He doesn't want excuses. He doesn't want to hear about capacity limits or regulations. He wants gasoline, and he wants it now. His officers try to explain the reality. The transportation corps is overwhelmed. The roads are clogged. The system is breaking. But Patton doesn't care about systems. He cares about speed. He knows the Germans are vulnerable right now at this exact moment. And if he stops, if he gives them time to dig in again, this opportunity dies. Thousands of soldiers die. The war drags on. Everything he's fought for collapses because some bureaucrat can't figure out how to deliver fuel. So he screams, he threatens, he demands miracles. And somewhere in a logistics office, exhausted commanders realize they need to create one. The plan is desperate and simple. Create a dedicated supply route. One road, one purpose. Nothing but fuel and ammunition moving day and night, nonstop from the beaches to Patton's advancing army. They call it the Red Ball Express, named after railroad terminology for priority freight. Red ball means urgent. Red ball means it doesn't stop for anything. But there's a problem. The U.S. Army doesn't have enough drivers. Most of the trained transportation personnel are already deployed, so they turn to the one group of soldiers the Army has consistently underutilized, undervalued, and overlooked: African American troops.
75% of the Red Ball Express drivers are black soldiers. Most of them have been assigned to menial labor, loading ships, digging trenches, tasks far below their capabilities. Many are educated. Some have driven trucks before, but most haven't. The Army doesn't care. They need bodies. They need men who can learn fast. They need soldiers willing to do the impossible without recognition, without glory, without even basic respect. And these men volunteer. Not because the conditions are good, not because they believe they'll be thanked. They volunteer because this is their chance to prove what they've always known, that they're as capable, as brave, as essential as anyone else wearing the uniform. The first convoy assembles on a dark August night. Hundreds of trucks lined up on a narrow French road, engines rumbling, headlights off. Enemy planes still patrol the skies, so the trucks will drive in darkness. No lights, no markers, just memory and instinct. Most of these drivers have never driven in combat conditions. Most have never driven at night without headlights. Some have barely driven at all. They receive 15 minutes of instruction. Stay close to the truck ahead. Don't stop. If your truck breaks down, push it off the road and get in another one. If you crash, someone will find you later. Maybe. One driver sits behind the wheel, hands shaking. He's 19 years old. 3 weeks ago, he was loading crates at a depot. Now he's responsible for 6,000 pounds of high-octane fuel, driving through enemy territory, in the dark, on roads he's never seen. If he crashes, the truck explodes. If he gets lost, soldiers die. If he's too slow, Patton's advance stops. The convoy commander gives the signal. Engines roar, gears grind, and the trucks begin to roll. Back in German headquarters, intelligence officers review reports. American truck movements detected. Large convoys heading east. One officer notes the activity, but dismisses it. The Americans are probably just repositioning supplies. Nothing to worry about. They'll be out of fuel by tomorrow anyway. Another officer agrees. He's seen American logistics firsthand. Inefficient, poorly organized, too reliant on improvisation. The US military might have industrial capacity, but they lack the discipline to use it effectively. He lights a cigarette and returns to more pressing matters. The Americans, he believes, will collapse under their own incompetence. By morning, they say, Patton will be stalled. But morning comes, and Patton isn't stalled. His tanks are still moving, faster even. Intelligence reports flood into German command. The American Third Army has advanced 30 miles overnight. 30 miles. That shouldn't be possible. Not with their supply situation. Not with their logistics. The officers check the numbers again. Something's wrong. Either the reports are exaggerated or the Americans have found a way to sustain an advance that defies every logistical principle in modern warfare. One officer suggests reconnaissance, find out what's happening. Another agrees, but before they can act, another report arrives. Patton's forces have advanced another 20 miles, in broad daylight, under fire, still moving. Confusion spreads through the command room. How? The answer is grinding its way through mud and rain at that exact moment. The Red Ball Express doesn't stop. It can't. Every hour, thousands of gallons of fuel leave the supply depots. Every hour, those gallons travel hundreds of miles through hostile territory. The trucks drive bumper to bumper. They form convoys stretching for miles, and they move. But the cost is brutal. Drivers work 20-hour shifts. Some go 48 hours without sleep. They drink coffee until their hands shake. They slap themselves to stay awake. They sing, they shout, they do anything to keep their eyes open because falling asleep at the wheel means death. The roads are nightmares. Rain turns dirt tracks into rivers of mud. Trucks slide off cliffs, wheels spin helplessly in deep ruts, engines overheat, axles snap, brakes fail, and there's no time to stop, no time to repair properly. Mechanics work miracles in minutes. They cannibalize parts from wrecked trucks. They improvise repairs with wire and tape. They keep the convoy moving because stopping isn't an option. One driver hits a crater he doesn't see in the darkness. The truck flips. Fuel spills. He crawls out bleeding and flags down the next truck. The convoy doesn't stop. He climbs into another vehicle and keeps driving. His hands are shaking, his ribs might be broken, but Patton needs fuel, and the fuel needs to move.
And then there's the enemy. German forces haven't abandoned France. Snipers hide in trees along the routes. They target drivers. One bullet, one truck, one explosion. Mines dot the roads. Some convoys hit them. Trucks explode in blinding flashes. The convoy swerves around the wreckage and keeps moving. Luftwaffe bombers occasionally break through Allied air cover. They strafe the roads. Machine gun bullets tear through canvas truck covers. Drivers duck. They don't stop. They can't stop. If they stop, they're easier targets. So they accelerate. They drive faster. They race through the attack and pray. One night, a convoy encounters a German patrol. Small unit, desperate. They open fire. The lead truck takes hits. The driver slumps over the wheel. The truck veers off the road. The second driver keeps going. He doesn't have a weapon. He's not infantry. He's a truck driver. His job is to deliver fuel, not to fight. So he drives past the enemy position, through the gunfire, and prays the next truck does the same. They all do. The entire convoy runs the gauntlet. Some trucks are hit, some drivers are wounded, but the fuel keeps moving. What the official reports don't mention, what the newspapers back home never write about, is the segregation. Even here, even in the most critical operation of the European campaign, the army maintains racial separation. African American drivers sleep in different areas. They eat at different times. They use different facilities. When convoys stop briefly for rest, black soldiers are directed to the back of food lines. Some are refused service entirely. They're delivering the fuel that's winning the war, driving through enemy fire, working themselves to collapse, and they're still treated as second-class soldiers. One driver finishes a brutal 30-hour shift. He's exhausted, starving. He approaches a field kitchen and asks for food. The cook looks at him and says, "The colored boys eat later." The driver stands there, covered in mud and blood, and waits. Because that's the rule. That's the army he's fighting for. And yet, these men keep driving. Not because the army respects them, not because the nation appreciates them. They keep driving because they understand something the generals don't. They're proving their worth with every mile. They're rewriting the narrative with every gallon delivered. And one day, the world will have to acknowledge what they've done. Maybe not today, maybe not this year, but someday. So, they drive. Patton's advance accelerates. His Third Army moves faster than any army in modern history. 50 miles in a day. 60, 70. The Germans retreat in chaos. They abandon equipment. They leave behind wounded soldiers. They run because they can't stand and fight. Not against this. Not against an enemy that never runs out of fuel, never slows down, never stops. German commanders send frantic messages to Berlin. Patton's advance is impossible. No army should be able to sustain this pace. Their logistics should have collapsed weeks ago. But the Americans keep coming. Like a machine. Relentless, unstoppable. One German general reviews the intelligence reports and realizes something terrifying. The Americans haven't just solved their logistics problem. They've weaponized it. Every gallon of fuel is a bullet. Every truck is a soldier. The roads themselves have become a battlefield, and the Germans are losing. He writes in his report, "We are not fighting an army. We are fighting an industrial system, and we cannot win." Back on the Red Ball Express, the system is barely holding together. Trucks are breaking down faster than mechanics can repair them. Drivers are collapsing from exhaustion. The accident rate is catastrophic. Trucks overturn. They collide. They slide off mountain roads. Men die. Not from enemy fire, but from the sheer physical impossibility of what they're being asked to do. One night, a driver falls asleep at the wheel. His truck drifts into the oncoming lane. Another truck swerves to avoid him. It crashes into a tree. The fuel ignites. Both drivers die. The convoy doesn't stop. It can't. Other trucks swerve around the burning wreckage and continue. The commanders know the human cost. They see the reports. They know men are dying. But they also know the alternative. If the Red Ball Express stops, Patton stops. If Patton stops, the Germans regroup. If the Germans regroup, the war drags on for another year. Another 100,000 casualties. Maybe more. So the convoys keep rolling. And the men keep dying.
48 hours without sleep. That's the average now.
Some drivers go longer. They develop tricks to stay awake. They bite their tongues until they taste blood. They stick their heads out the window and let the cold air sting their faces. They talk to themselves, shouting to drown out the exhaustion. One driver starts hallucinating. He sees things in the road that aren't there. Children, animals, German soldiers. He swerves to avoid them and nearly crashes. Another driver notices and pulls alongside. He shouts through the window, keeping him awake, keeping him focused. They drive like that for 20 miles, side by side, one man keeping another alive through sheer force of will. And then the weather turns. September brings storms, rain like a wall. The roads dissolve into mud. Trucks sink to their axles. Drivers wade through waist-deep muck, pushing, pulling, trying to free vehicles that weigh 6 tons. Their hands bleed, their backs scream, but they keep pushing because if this truck doesn't move, the one behind it doesn't move, and if the convoy stops, everything stops. Mechanics work in the rain, lying in mud, hands numb from cold, replacing broken parts they can barely see. They work without light, by feel, because flashlights attract enemy attention. One mechanic changes an engine in total darkness during a rainstorm under sporadic artillery fire. It takes him 4 hours. When he finishes, he climbs into the cab and drives the truck himself, because the original driver has collapsed. German intelligence begins circulating a rumor. The Americans have unlimited trucks, thousands, tens of thousands, more trucks than should exist. It's the only explanation for how they're sustaining this advance. One intelligence officer calculates the number of trucks required to deliver the observed amount of fuel and concludes it's impossible. The Americans don't have that many vehicles in the entire European theater. But the fuel keeps arriving. The advance keeps accelerating. So the Germans invent explanations. Maybe the Americans are using secret routes. Maybe they've captured German fuel depots. Maybe they've developed a new type of engine that uses less fuel. None of these explanations are true, but they're easier to accept than the reality. The reality is simpler and more terrifying. A few thousand men and trucks driving themselves to death, accomplishing what the Germans believed was mathematically impossible. The bottlenecks become critical. Too many trucks, not enough road. Convoys stack up for miles. Drivers sit in traffic jams under enemy artillery, unable to move forward or backward. Some abandon their trucks and run. Others stay, hunched behind steering wheels, waiting for the shells to stop falling. Command realizes the system is breaking, not from enemy action, from success. They're moving so much fuel, so much ammunition, so many supplies that the roads can't handle the volume. Traffic directors are assigned to major intersections. They wave trucks through, screaming orders, trying to prevent total gridlock. One intersection becomes legendary. A single military policeman stands in the middle of a crossroads, directing 4 separate convoys simultaneously. Trucks roar past him from every direction. He hasn't slept in 2 days. His voice is gone from shouting. But he keeps moving, keeps directing, because if this intersection clogs, the entire Red Ball Express collapses. And then Patton nearly runs dry. September 20th, 1944. Patton's Third Army is 300 miles ahead of schedule. They've advanced so fast, so far, that they've outrun their supply lines. The Red Ball Express is stretched to breaking. And for the first time since the operation began, there's not enough fuel. Patton receives the report and explodes. He doesn't care about logistics challenges. He doesn't care about road capacity. He wants fuel. His tanks are literally rolling to a stop. His infantry is running out of ammunition. If he can't advance, the Germans will dig in. Everything he's accomplished in the past 6 weeks will be wasted. He calls his logistics command. The conversation is brief and brutal. Either they deliver fuel tonight, or the war is over. Not the entire war, just his war, his chance, his moment. The logistics command hangs up the phone and stares at a map. There's no fuel to deliver. The depots are empty. The convoys are already running at maximum capacity. They've pushed the system past every limit. There's nothing left to give. And then, someone suggests the impossible.
Strip every non-essential vehicle of fuel, every Jeep, every staff car,
every transport truck not on the Red Ball Express, take their fuel, and put it on trucks heading to Patton. It's desperate, it's reckless, it might cripple other operations, but it might work. The order goes out. Within hours, fuel is being siphoned from vehicles across France. Mechanics drain tanks by hand. Drivers surrender their fuel rations. Supply officers empty their reserves. Everything flows to the Red Ball Express. That night, the largest single convoy in the operation's history rolls out. Over 1,000 trucks, every available vehicle, every drop of fuel they could find. The convoy stretches for 50 miles. It's so large that German reconnaissance spots it from miles away. Luftwaffe bombers are scrambled. This is their chance. Destroy this convoy, and Patton stops. The bombers arrive just after midnight. Flares light up the sky. The lead truck explodes, then another. Drivers scatter, diving into ditches, running for cover. The convoy grinds to a halt. And then, Allied fighters arrive. They engage the bombers. Dogfights erupt over the convoy, planes fall burning from the sky, explosions light up the darkness, and through it all, through the chaos and fire, the trucks start moving again. Drivers climb back into their vehicles, they navigate around burning wrecks, they drive through smoke so thick they can't see. They drive by instinct, by faith, by sheer desperate will, and they deliver the fuel. Patton receives the fuel at dawn. His tanks roar back to life. His advance resumes, and the Germans, watching from their positions, realize they're witnessing something unprecedented. The Americans just sustained a major advance through sheer logistical willpower. They turned supply chains into weapons. They made roads more dangerous than battlefields. One German commander writes in his journal that night, "We are not losing to superior tactics or technology. We are being buried by American productivity, and there is no defense against that." But the invisible heroes remain invisible. Newspaper reports credit Patton's brilliance. Military dispatches praise the Third Army's speed and aggression, but nobody mentions the Red Ball Express. Nobody writes about the drivers who died to deliver that fuel. Nobody photographs the African-American soldiers who drove through hell so white generals could claim victories. The medals go to tank commanders. The headlines go to infantry units. The recognition goes everywhere except to the men who made it all possible. One driver sits in his truck reading a newspaper. The headline celebrates Patton's liberation of a French city. There's a photograph of soldiers cheering. The article calls it a triumph of American military excellence. The driver looks at the newspaper, then looks at his hands. They're scarred from changing tires. His arms are burned from handling fuel. He's been awake for 30 hours. He's driven through enemy fire, through storms, through roads that didn't exist, and nobody knows his name. He folds the newspaper and starts his engine, because there's another convoy forming. More fuel to deliver, more miles to drive, more chances to prove what he already knows, that he matters, that his work matters, that history will remember, even if the present won't acknowledge it. So he drives. The Red Ball Express operates for 82 days. In that time, it delivers over 400,000 tons of supplies. 12,000 trucks drive over 2 million miles. They sustain the fastest armored advance in military history. They help end the war in Europe months ahead of schedule. They save countless lives by accelerating Allied victory. And when it's over, the drivers return to their units. No medals, no parades, no recognition. Most return to the same segregated conditions they left. Some are assigned back to menial labor. Their service is noted in official records and then forgotten. But something has changed. These men know what they accomplished. They know they were essential. They know they proved something that needed proving. And that knowledge, that certainty, becomes part of the foundation for the civil rights movement that follows. Because if black soldiers can save a war, can accomplish the impossible, can turn mockery into triumph, then no one can ever again claim they're inferior. The road they drove becomes more than a supply route. It becomes proof, evidence, an undeniable answer to every racist lie the nation ever told itself.
The Germans never recover from Patton's advance. The speed, the relentlessness, the impossible sustainability of it breaks their defensive plans. They retreat across the Rhine, they consolidate, they try to hold,
But the momentum is lost. The psychological advantage is gone. They're fighting an enemy that doesn't follow the rules, doesn't accept limitations, doesn't stop. Years later, a former German general is interviewed about the war. He's asked what surprised him most about American capabilities. He thinks for a moment, then says, "Their logistics. We mocked them. We thought they were disorganized, inefficient, incapable of sustained operations. We were wrong. They turned supply chains into weapons. They made the impossible routine. And that's why they won." The interviewer asks if there was a specific moment he realized Germany would lose. The general nods. When Patton didn't stop. When we calculated he would run out of fuel, and he didn't. When our intelligence reported supply movements that shouldn't have been possible, but were happening anyway. That's when I knew. We weren't fighting soldiers, we were fighting an industrial civilization. And you can't defeat that with tactics. Today, modern logistics owes everything to the Red Ball Express. The principles developed in those 82 days, under fire, under pressure, under impossible conditions, became the foundation for every supply chain that followed. Just-in-time delivery, rapid response logistics, continuous flow operations, they all trace back to those roads in France, to those drivers in the darkness, to that desperate race to keep Patton moving. Amazon's delivery systems, FedEx's hub-and-spoke model, modern military supply doctrine, they all learned from the Red Ball Express. They all built on the innovations created by men who were never supposed to be heroes, who were never supposed to be remembered, who were systematically denied recognition for their service. But history has a way of correcting itself, slowly, imperfectly, but inevitably. Imagine one of those drivers, 20 years old, from Mississippi, volunteered for service despite knowing the Army would never respect him, despite knowing he'd face discrimination in uniform, despite knowing his contributions would be minimized or erased. He's sitting in a truck on a dark French road. Rain is pouring, the engine is struggling, enemy artillery thunders in the distance. He's been awake for 2 days. His hands are blistered, his eyes burn from exhaustion, every muscle aches. He's terrified, exhausted, alone. But he keeps driving, because behind him, other trucks are following. And behind those trucks, there's an entire army that needs fuel. And behind that army, there's a war that needs to be won. And behind that war, there's a world that needs to be freed. He doesn't know if he'll survive the night. He doesn't know if anyone will remember his name. He doesn't know if his country will ever thank him. But he drives anyway. Because that's what heroes do. History remembers the victories. It celebrates the generals and the battles. It records the dates and the strategies. But it rarely remembers the roads that led to them. It forgets the invisible labor that made triumph possible. It overlooks the unglamorous, unrecognized, essential work that changed everything. The Red Ball Express, built by invisible heroes, ridiculed by the enemy, ignored by their own nation, became the artery that kept freedom alive. It became proof that logistics wins wars. It became evidence that every soldier matters regardless of rank or recognition. It became a testament to human endurance, to dignity in the face of injustice, to the power of people who refuse to accept the limitations others place on them. Those trucks stopped rolling in November 1944. But the road they built, the legacy they created, the proof they delivered, that never stopped. It's still moving, still delivering, still proving what was always true. That the heroes we need aren't always the heroes we recognize, but they're heroes nonetheless. And their road, invisible as it was, paved the way to victory.